Today we welcome Mr. Khari Edwards from Brookdale Hospital to the show. Welcome, Mr. Edwards.
Thank you for having me.
Khari is the Vice President of External Affairs at Brookdale Hospital here in Brooklyn. A very important role he plays. Tell us a little bit about yourself, Khari.
Well, been at Brookdale 7 years. I'm a head of community relations, public relations, government relations, and I said public relations.
You're in charge of a lot of relations.
Yes, a lot of relations.
So when you're in charge of all these external type of affairs with the government, political, probably some religious groups and things going on outside the hospital, how is your interaction with the doctors and the community work? Are you intertwined in the daily provision of care, or is it more on a administrative, like business end of things?
It's a little bit of both. Part of my role is, one, to intimately, like you said earlier, be part of internal relations, which are the doctors, whether we're setting up ORs, whatever we're doing internally, and then expressing that outwardly to the community. I joke and say I'm in charge of 1.3 million people's health education, and my relationship with the doctors, nurses, frontline staff is very intimate. There are nights that I've been in the emergency room 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, one, supporting them because we have a very interesting patient base, but more so that they feel that what they have to do is important, and I'll take care of the other things.
So advocating both for the folks coming into the hospital and those working inside of the hospital. How does one develop a career into the external affairs of a hospital? What's your background? What's your education?
So I fell into this by mistake. I graduated from Midwood High School in 1991, and I wanted to become a gym teacher. And my dad wanted me to become an occupational therapist. So after a lot of arguments and discussions in 2, 3 schools, I ended up graduating from Pierce College just in a basic liberal arts degree. 1998, I ended up working for an assemblyman, and politics was the place that I wanted to be. Community relations as it pertained to doing all things outside of healthcare. However, in 2008, Governor Cuomo had just taken office, and there was this thought that he was going to close a couple hospitals in Brooklyn. And where I worked was for the state senate. We ended up doing a big health policy program around the MRT, the medical redesign team, Medicaid redesign team, and that's how I fell into healthcare. And after I left the state senate, I was offered a job at Downstate in Brookdale, and I took Brookdale because my children went to school across the street.
Well, that's pretty convenient.
Yeah.
Brookdale Hospital is a major provider of healthcare in our county here in Brooklyn, serving well over 1 million people, obviously, as you mentioned. It's a tertiary type of care center, trauma center.
Yes.
You see all sorts of diseases and pathology. And educating the community, keeping the hospital running is a really tough job. What is a typical day like for you? What time do you start in the morning, and then what time do you not go home?
So a typical day is about 15,000 steps throughout the building. Depends on if I have a meeting. I try to get in work at 10 a.m. because I usually don't leave till 10 p.m.
Wow.
But for my typical days, anything from going up to different floors, working a little with patient experience on if they have issues. Part of my role, too, is to reach out to the elected officials and talk about capital projects. So anything from MRI machines to x-rays, making sure the lights are on, the doors on, and then sometimes I have fun just kind of putting out fires, whether it's our union fighting with the doctors or the doctors fighting with administration. I usually find myself in the middle of it, and it's fun.
Yeah, the hospitals are a culture of their own, a world of their own. I've been working in hospitals since I started volunteering when I was 13, and I agree with you. There are lots of fires to put out. Oftentimes they're good fires,
Yep.
Things that were brought to the attention for a valid reason that needed attention. You mentioned something about MRI machines, keeping the lights on. Our political affairs, our political relationship is important, especially in New York. The council does control some dollars to help provide hospitals with some equipment that they may need.
Yeah.
Any new projects that you're setting out for Brookdale to present to the politicians or present to the council, or looking for funding on these days?
Well, as you well know, every year is a new challenge, is a new need. Last year we gained about $1.3 million for MRIs, stretchers, and some ancillary things, again, to keep the hospital moving. Recently, Brookdale, Interfaith, and Kingsbrook have merged into one Brooklyn health system. So now I'm in charge of reaching out to all the electeds for each different hospital, which has added a few gray hairs to my had, but it's been really rewarding. So there's a few things that are important to me, and I think they're important to the hospitals, because Interfaith, Kingsbrook, and Brookdale are in very interesting parts of the community, especially in Brooklyn. We've started, especially for our trauma survey that we've just recently passed, thank goodness, we have a very robust gun violence program in what we call the Central Brooklyn, East Brooklyn area, and that's been something very important to me. Just to talk about, when I first got to Brookdale, we had 255 gunshot wounds in a given year. So we bring students in, we bring churches in to talk about just the effect of gun violence on a community, and that's been ultra successful. Have over 1,200 students have come through the program since 2016. And something that's also very important is the 2020 census. And you work in a hospital, and when we count the folks that are in our community and they're not counted, then as hospitals we don't get the surplus or the stuff that
you don't get the dollars you need for miscalculations.
Because you and I will know 1.3 million, but according to the census, only 600,000 pass through our doors, and we get paid on that. So the census has been a huge undertaking. We work with Greater New York. We work with our other hospitals. We worked with Mount Sinai. I think one of your vice presidents are on the board of that. So that's been the two most rewarding pieces that I've been doing in the last couple of years at Brookdale.
Yeah, for our viewers who are watching, and I think some people out there are surprised to find that hospitals are out there trying to educate the community to be healthier and to decrease disease, to decrease trauma visits. It's equivalent to a business going out and saying we don't want any more customers, right. And it's just the opposite in that your local hospital is out there to provide health in the community, not just within the walls of the hospital.
Right.
I think as hospital administrators, we'd all be very happy to have less customers. It means that we're doing a better job
Yes.
of keeping people healthy. You mentioned gun violence, which is a major problem in New York, especially in your area. I work with some of your anesthesiologists who are your trauma anesthesiologists, and the stories are terrible, but I hear the service that you provide is a life-saving, critical part of Brookdale, is that trauma service. What kind of programs do you have? We mentioned the churches and bringing students in. Who is educating the community? Is it doctors? Is it social workers? Is it the police? Who are you bringing to help educate our
Well,
community?
the beautiful part of working internally with the doctors and the residents, being a teaching hospital, we're able to talk to them, and you guys don't get a lot of free time, but in the free time we've started a program called Brookdale at Your Door, where we bring doctors into the community to talk about everything from pharmacy to heart disease to orthopedics. And it's been greatly successful up for us because, you well know, Brookdale 7 years ago, and I'm not tooting my own horn, 7 years ago, it was called everything from Kildale, patients go in and they don't come out. Now we've kind of opened it up as a community hospital. We have a 200-seat auditorium. We bring in schools. We're having Christmas plays. And what we're trying to do is, like you said, bring a healthier human being, not just through medicine. And it's worked a great deal for us.
So the facilities at Brookdale, I've heard of some building going on. I've heard of expansion. What are some of the big capital improvements that are on the horizon for Brookdale, especially in its participation with One Brooklyn Health?
Well, I have to give Governor Cuomo a huge shout out. Part of his Vital Brooklyn plan to take care of Central Brooklyn on a holistic standpoint, he gave $700 million to One Brooklyn Health to do exactly what you're talking about, to provide community with a healthier services. So now we can say that we are, top 5 in the state in cardiac cath and in thrombectomy. We have a stellar, what do we call it? Like you said, trauma team and orthopedics program. So, like I said, we've shifted the dynamic of the way people used to think of Brookdale as a place that you don't have to come to, you now want to come to. And thanks to this infusion of capital funding, we're building new ICUs. We're going to try to expand the emergency room that was built in the 20s for 30,000 people, but see 100,000 people. Everything from even reaching out to the mayor's office to get the street paved in front of Rockaway Parkway has been a great deal for us. And the biggest thing is making sure that the heat and the AC is working in the times that you need it, and we're getting there.
So there's a lot riding on your shoulders. What are your future plans for your career? How do you see yourself expanding at Brookdale?
I'm a community guy. Started in politics, one day want to take that leap of faith into that. I think that we affect people on a greater platform by doing the things that, you do. You call the service to be a doctor. For me, connecting, construction, connecting different facets of the world to folks that need it is something that I like to do. But, right now I'm very happy at Brookdale. And
Yeah, it's an exciting time there. We talked a little bit about Brooklyn One Health. The other hospitals, are they going to continue to operate, or are we going to be seeing changes in the way that they interact with Brookdale?
Yeah, I mean, part of, we joked about this before the show, we don't always compete, we share. I think what we needed to do from those three hospitals is actually share. We're going to be the tertiary hospital. Interfaith is going to be more of the community hospital it's been. And Kingsbrook, there's a lot of different conversations of what will happen, but the reality of it is the 2.2 million in that central Brooklyn area will still, have the services, the health services, and will come to Mount Sinai, will come to Brooklyn Hospital. But like I said, that particular hub, and you know very clearly that some folks don't travel too far out of their catchment area for service, but those that do, or those who want to stay home, we want to make sure that they're taken care of.
Yeah, that's very common here in Brooklyn. There are a lot of smaller hospitals, community-type hospitals, which you tend to see out in rural America, where you may have a hospital that has 100 or 200 beds. They may not be able to provide every single, what we call a tertiary service. And for our viewers, a tertiary hospital is sort of like a full-thickness hospital where they can provide nearly all the services you would expect. And we do have these smaller hospitals like Kingsbrook and Interfaith, where we rely heavily on hospitals like Brookdale and other tertiary care centers in Brooklyn to take care of some of the sicker patients who require sometimes more complex care. And it's good to hear that Brookdale is going to continue providing this tertiary service. We talked a bit about what you do at work, a bit about the future of Brookdale and healthcare in Brooklyn. We have a major problem here in Brooklyn with cancer and cancer screening. It's important for patients to get into their primary care offices and to have good access to doctors for their mammograms and colonoscopies and cervical exams and prostate. Does Brookdale have a big outpatient presence?
Yes, so we have 7 ambulatory sites that we call them family healthcare centers, seeing almost 30,000 per, as far as Eastern Parkway going towards Queens and Flatbush Avenue going probably towards the Verrazano. The biggest thing that we find, however, is that, the governor calls it the social determinants of health, where if you want food on your table, or you want to make sure your kids could go to school, or your lights are on, health becomes a secondary portion of it. And the unfortunate part about a lot of these comorbidities that we do get in the hospitals, because, we don't realize that an unhealthy body can't do all these other things. So, like I said, part of my role is to continue to educate folks that we're not getting, stage 4 cancer in an emergency room, but what we're trying to do, we're getting you at stage 1 and we could do something about it. Or I had a colonoscopy 2 years ago, and as an African American man, it's 45 and not 50, but yet, something happened to me and I was like, but I work in a hospital, so I was able to get that done. But I realized a lot of my friends, a lot of folks who are going through stuff, they can't put the other things aside to realize if they're not here, nothing else matters. So I hate to say it in that way, but it's something that is huge for us.
It's true what you bring up, especially with colonoscopy. I'm a gastroenterologist, so I never thought I'd be working Saturdays and Sundays. When I was back in medical school, most doctors would work a weekend here and there, taking call for a hospital. But because of the need for more availability for colonoscopy, I work nearly every Sunday doing colonoscopies for the same reason that you just explained. You need to provide ease of access. It's not very easy for someone to take off of work today.
Right.
There are, unfortunately, in our society, especially as New Yorkers, we're always racing around in the rat race. Sometimes missing a day or two of work, you can get fired, or you miss a big opportunity. So in our practice, especially in my practice, I will do Sundays simply because I know people need to be screened. And important in your relationship to the politicians, expanding this access of care is important. So you have these clinics that people can just call up or show up to for care. Is there a website or is there a number? Or how can they look out and try to find one of these clinics where they can go and get care?
Glad you asked. www.brookdalehospital.org. It's something where, like most hospitals, you go online and you look at the services we offer. And like you said, tertiary, we offer hundreds of services, everything from dental to ophthalmology and stuff. But you want to kind of get comfortable with, again, meeting you, and if you were my GI doc, at least have a personal relationship with you. That still goes a long way, even though they're doing telemedicine and stuff. A lot of folks in our community still want to be able to touch and feel their doctor in a good way. And so, like for me, so I'd be remiss to say that I am a type 1 diabetic and have been that way for 42 years. And I remember every pediatrician and every endocrinologist that I've had up to this point, because I was able to sit through that. And without trusting those doctors, I would never I would have never gotten this far. And I think that personal touch that you guys have is important. Even though we're in a texting world.
We're in a text your doctor world right now, which is good and bad. Are you doing telehealth services over at Brookdale yet, or is that something still on the horizon?
It's still on the horizon for us. We're just trying to get our bases covered. We're 85, 86% Medicaid,
right.
Which means that, folks show up at our door. So for us, it's, when I got to Brookdale, we had doors that you had to open in case of emergency. Now we have sliding doors, thanks to, Nick Perry, who's a great politician, assemblyman. He's helped us out in that. So while the communities are still changing, good thing we're changing with them. I would love to get to a telehealth situation, but right now it's like
yeah, it's tough. And to be totally honest, I'm not privy to all of the laws in New York State about telehealth. I know in New Jersey, they've had some parity laws where they're requiring the insurance companies to cover it. I think in New York we should, if we don't already, that should be something in our next step. I agree with you. Patients still want to touch and feel their doctors.
Right.
I mean, I did a colonoscopy today on a lady, and she would not leave until I gave her a big hug.
Right.
I can't imagine the relationship being through telehealth as personable, but I think for the newer generation, that is what they come to expect maybe.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you'll get to telehealth at some point, like all of us will.
Well, hopefully.
But in my mind, I still don't know that it replaces that personal face-to-face interaction, especially when we're breaking bad news or going over tough results.
Exactly.
Part of growing up in Brooklyn for you, I guess, you've seen all the administrations. I think we have a lot more help from our politicians these days when it comes to healthcare. We know that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound.
Right.
And in the future, when I was a fellow, we did some research showing that if we spent money on colonoscopies, giving them out for free at the time before we had Obamacare, we can actually save money. And prevention is very important. In terms of your work at Brookdale and going out into the churches, the schools, do you find that people are really receptive to this? Do people show up to the events? Do you get a nice, robust feeling from the community about it?
So an elected official told me a long time ago that you have to touch a voter 7 times, and I realized that
I don't know, in today's politics, they want to say touch 7 times.
Yeah, that's right. Interact with, well, I can't say interact either. Communicate with a voter 7 times. In the case of Brookdale, it's 10 times, because the first 5 times we're trying to convince them that we're still not the place that killed their grandmother. And then the next 5 times, they're like, wow, this is great. What we've tried to do is kind of do testimonials on a community level. We don't have the bank that, Mount Sinai and Presbyterian has, but what we do have are folks that go out into their own churches and communities and talk good and bad about us. So for us, it was really just a matter of turning the page, letting folks know that, in 20 years of bad stuff, we're not expecting to turn it back in a day, but give us a chance. And I think we've gotten to that point.
Yeah, I've had the same experience also. I don't know that everyone wants to take off an hour from their day to go hear about getting a colonoscopy, but it is important. I'm sure for all the other health, topics that you have, like diabetes, which you've been battling and all. It's very important for our viewers to get out there and find your local hospital. Almost all of the hospitals provide some community education, and if you're watching today and you live near Brookdale, please check out their website, brookdalehospital.org.
Don't worry, Brookdale's a good friend of
Brooklyn's a good friend. Yeah, we're all good friends in Brooklyn. Spread love.
Yes,
it's the Brooklyn way.
Brooklyn way.
And so if you're watching today and you're out near Brookdale, they offer a lot of educational services, learning how to prevent disease instead of having to battle it later on in life. And our friend Khari here is the Vice President of External Affairs. And so if you're watching, please log on to their website, check into their community affairs at the hospital. Where do you see Brookdale in 20 years from now? Because it seems that healthcare goes in these 20-year generational changes. And when I joined when I went to medical school 20 years ago, or give or take a couple of years, it was a lot different environment. And I think in 20 years it'll be a much different landscape. Where do you see Brookdale playing in 20 years from now?
You know, interestingly
When
enough,
you're mayor of New York.
well, 20, that may be governor by
Governor,
then. But
okay.
it's okay. Interestingly enough, I think Brookdale will be one of those pillars that never leaves the community. No matter how much the community changes, that building represents not only the largest employer in East Brooklyn, but a lot of the communities, they do stay the same, even though the natives move out and the newcomers move in. There's still a cultural sensitivity that remains, and it doesn't matter. I mean, maybe you'll be able to fly onto the roof, in the technology kind of way, but I think the building will remain because that service, no matter what, covers that spot from there all the way to the Queens border. And healthcare is like fashion, though. It may change a lot, but it's still the same cotton.
The bootcut jeans are coming back in
Yes,
style,
yes,
and maybe, like you said, how Brookdale's reputation is improving. Is it coming back into styles, quote unquote? Are you seeing the gentrification of Brooklyn extend out to the Brookdale area?
Not as quickly as other communities. I live in Crown Heights, Prospect Heights, or Crow Hill, whatever you want to call it now, has changed a little quicker. But I think it's about the transportation hub. I think some of the things that we are doing, that we've partnered with the city and state on, DOT's bringing electric car stations into the communities, more bike lanes in the community. So I think that there's going to be a shift. But I think until we start to get the community a little healthier, and more so in the medical side of it, there probably won't be this super change. But I give you 10, 15 years, the community's going to, there's cycles. So when I grew up in Crown Heights, it was a heavy African American, and now it's a heavy Jewish. But then my neighbors told me that years before that it was Jewish. So we continually go in great cycles. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there are areas of Brooklyn that when I moved here, rent was pretty cheap, and now it's more expensive than living in Midtown in the city. And I think one of the major things about any community is that if you provide good health care, you will see, the citizens sort of provide or attend. Once the reputation is there, that all these services are available, like you're telling us at Brookdale. For our viewers, there are some major changes coming to that area of Brooklyn with Brooklyn One Health, Kingsbrook, Interfaith, and Brookdale, all getting a huge infusion of cash, thanks to our politicians really stepping in and trying to save healthcare in Brooklyn, which is so important. One of the messages we have talked about here on the show with other providers and from other hospitals is that you don't always need to cross the river to go get good health care. You can stay home here in Brooklyn because, as we all know, I mean, preparing for a colonoscopy, then sitting in a car on the bridge while that colonoscopy prep is kicking in a little bit can be really uncomfortable. And people don't have to travel for their surgeries anymore or for specialty care. They can find it at Brookdale or some of the other tertiary care centers in Brooklyn. Before we finish up here today, again, we're talking with Khari, who's the Vice President of External Affairs here in Brooklyn at Brookdale University Hospital. Tell us a little bit more personal about yourself. What do you do for fun here in Brooklyn? What's your favorite restaurant in Brooklyn, as I ask most of our guests? Where do you like to eat?
I have a favorite food. My favorite restaurant is Suede Restaurant on Clarendon Road.
What kind of food do they serve?
It is Caribbean infusion. Friend of mine opened it up a few years ago. Great drinks and a variety of Caribbean food. My background is I'm half Trinidadian, half Guyanese. That is my favorite place. It's a place you guys gotta, visit.
And we know where you eat. What's your favorite park? What's your favorite place to go?
Well, my favorite part
is in the outdoors here.
Lincoln Terrace Park, not too far from the hospital. I'm seeing him in like a very closed area guy. But interestingly enough, my son is a senior at Bedford Academy High School, and he's in his basketball season. So I'm more in gyms now, watching games. He has a game.
Family sports guy.
Yeah, and
nice.
My wife and I just moved back into our home. We had a fire last July, so we just moved back into our home. So it's been, Brooklyn has been my home for a long time.
You're not going anywhere, right?
I'm not going anywhere.
Brooklyn born, Brooklyn bred.
Yes.
Khari Edwards here from Brookdale Hospital, Brookdale University Hospital in Brooklyn, talking about all the great things going on there in the community and the expansion that's going on. For our viewers, you can check out brookdalehospital.org for more information. Thank you for your interest in our show. I invite you to visit our website at medcastplus.com. And please tune into our episodes here to gain more information about healthcare here in Brooklyn and New York City. We try to bring you some of Brooklyn's best, whether it's a physician, nurse, or today with Khari, who is a hospital administrator at Brookdale Hospital. Thank you for watching, and stay healthy, Brooklyn.